Good evening, everyone. In last night's show, we started by discussing the horrible Easter Massacre, which killed more than 300 Christians in Sri Lanka and injured hundreds more. That, of course, was last Sunday. Now, we discussed the fact that by watching the mainstream media coverage of the horror, you may not have gotten the full scope of what happened and who did the attacks, who were the victims in the attacks. In fact, they'd been described as people worshiping Easter. Well, of course, they were Christians, as we said yesterday. And today, ISIS claimed responsibility for the radical Islamist attacks, and that's what they were. Now, the media has begrudgingly acknowledged that fact today. But in today's world, one way that we measure public reaction to a news story is by looking at how many Google searches it receives. It's kind of sad, but it's true. Now, would it shock you to know that searches for the attacks in Sri Lanka were outnumbered by searchers for the fire at Paris's Notre Dame Cathedral by 7-1? Now, keep in mind, nobody died in that fire, and no one was even allowed by the media to speculate on a cause for the blaze. Only the party line was repeated over and over again. It was an accident. So, absent of any victims of a certain religion, and absent any group being held responsible for the fire, it was the perfect story for wall-to-wall, nonstop mainstream media coverage. Now, don't get me wrong, I have tremendous respect and admiration for the history, the architectural magnificence, and most of all, the religious significance of Notre Dame's cathedral. The fire was a tragic blow to the church, to Paris, and to the world. But if it was an accident, as we've been told, how does it compare to the Sri Lanka attacks? How does it justify 7 times the Google searches? In my view, it simply doesn't. Now, make no mistake, these searches are driven by media coverage, and media coverage is driven by media bias. How many of you know that just days after the attacks in New Zealand in the mosques, scores of people were killed in the Christian village of Mishika in Nigeria by Boko Haram? Or that on February 25th, 50 were killed and 140 homes were burned in a predominantly Christian village by Fulani, the terrorists in central Nigeria? How many Google searches do you think those stories have racked up? Probably not enough to even notice, because the media elected not to tell you about those attacks. Now, it would be foolish of me to ignore certain geopolitical realities that also enter into how many times stories are Googled, viewed, and shared online. But make no mistake, internet traffic is driven by exposure. The media that cover these kinds of stories give or don't give exposure. They're driven in so many instances by their own institutionalized biases. And until that changes, and don't hold your collective breath, we will see more one-sided, lopsided, misguided search numbers on Google and elsewhere, like the 7-1 Notre Dame to Sri Lanka results. And the translation of those numbers, what people should be learning about and caring about, isn't always what they are learning about and caring about. I'm Steve Malzberg in for Rick Sanchez, and we do our part to change that right here, where it's time to do news again.
I'm Rick Sanchez. You found us on YouTube, and that's awesome. But you know what? I'm also live every night at 7 and 8 p.m. Eastern on DirecTV and Dish and cable and satellite, the RT app, and Pluto TV. I'll see you there.